Chapter 26, Sex During Sunday School. I've talked about the farm pond a lot, but building it was another matter. Dad hired a local drinker to dig the pond. He had an old excavator he brought in on a flimsy trailer and then quickly got to drinking. This was a perfect job for a drinking excavator. Way in the back of the farm where no one could spy him, there was nothing but lots of wildlife and a heavy dose of peace and quiet. He slowly started to dig. He worked for a week or so and then disappeared for a few more. Dad got a hold of them and he returned to drink and dig some more. He dug in a circle. The water started to flow into the pond till there was a good 6 feet of water. He drank some more. I snuck back there and spied on him, then headed back up to the house and called Dad with a report. I told him the guy was just sitting in the cab, peacefully drinking a beer. Dad laughed. He said he'd be right home. By that time, the guy had dug himself into an island in the middle of the pond. How are you going to get the equipment off the island? Dad laughed again and told me to get my swimming suit. We headed back up to the house and I changed while Dad got a rope and an old skimboard the boys had used years before. I still wasn't sure what he had in mind, but I soon learned. Dad tied that rope to the excavator bucket and had the guy go round and round so I could ski. Oh, we laughed so. It isn't just city kids that can ski. I can ski too. Dad had the man build a bridge so he could get off the island, but it left a mound in the center that always pissed Dad off. When we talked about it later, we would still smile because who gets to ski on a farm pond? I did. I loved that area of the farm, but realize now that I never went into the woods alone, and I mean never. I wonder why. We would go into the woods and play in groups. One thing we loved to do was build a fire and make grass soup. We would get an old pot and boil whatever we could find. This would entertain us for hours. Behind the pond was a hardy creek where you had to cross to get to Wallace's Mountain, and it could get quite deep in the spring and was lovely. Those were the years the creek still had fish and other wildlife. Jane and I decided to walk up to the mountain during the spring and check it out. We feared old Mr. Wallace would be working and would not see us there and shoot the buckshot gun. An island had formed in the middle of the creek, and Jane told me to jump across it and then on to the other bank. She was planning on doing the same thing. I jumped with great confidence and sank right up to my crotch as soon as I landed. All I could think of was the leeches. Jane flipped out. She said she'd go get a board and left me there in the middle of the creek with the mud up to my crotch. I waited, and eventually I realized the trip back to the house and then finding a board and then returning was going to take a lot longer than I wanted to wait. I slowly pulled myself out, trying to keep my shoes on as I didn't want to lose them. One came off, but I could retrieve it. I sat on the bank, waiting. She finally returned with a board, and we used it to get all the way across the creek. We didn't go as far on our exploration as we had enough excitement for one day. We left the board in the creek and walked back home. Dad made us a country hibachi. City people had hibachis, and we were going to have one too. Dad cut a large piece of plywood in a circle and then cut a nice 12-inch circle in the center. In that hole, he put in metal supports and dropped a little small cauldron. A witch's pot for brewing eyes of newt and hairs of dog. Over this, he constructed a good grilling grid that fit perfectly on top of the cauldron. Next, he created a lift for the coals so they lay right under the grill. Then he collected and painted up 4 small straight-back chairs that he had picked up at one of the relatives' houses where he was acting as an executor. He painted one red, one yellow, another orange, and the last one brown. The table sat about 24 inches off the ground and turned out rather nice. We used that very often for a small window of time. We grilled some steak, but usually it was food that Dad found interesting after a few nips. Round or ring bologna was his food of choice. We played with that thing for hours. First the bologna this way for grilling marks, then the other. Sometimes we actually ate vegetables off the grill, but this was still a new idea to us. Grilling vegetables was a city thing, and we had to think about that for a while. The little chairs he fixed up worked wonders unless you were a little girl and could actually get your knees under the table. You could actually scoot in far enough to burn your knees. Then, when you jumped, you risked upsetting the whole apple cart. Dad loved to light firecrackers off the hibachi. One bright Sunday, I was standing in the yard admiring the early spring day, waiting for my ride to Sunday school. I had on the required dress with my little legs hanging out. Dad had the firecrackers out, and he was throwing them at our feet. He threw several to my screams and the stings of my blast, and he laughed and laughed. Then he took us to Sunday school and went back home for his weekly sex. Blasting him with firecrackers must have really revved him up. I learned to stay in the house till I saw him walking out to the car. Sometimes when he was late picking us up, the townies would tease us and say things like, "Oh, your parents must be having fun without you." Just another secret I was yet to understand, but I always figured the whole town knew, but me.